So there's been quite a bit of confusion since that Nintendo Direct ended, and to be honest, at this point, it's pretty much on Nintendo, because in some cases they just did not explain things well and sort of left it up to people to just find stuff on their website and try to decipher what exactly is happening. And one part in particular seems to really be making the rounds, and it comes down to Nintendo and their physical game distribution. And it seems to have people really concerned about something that they don't necessarily need to be concerned about yet. Now, I will say, I think this could become a problem throughout, or probably by the end of the Switch 2 generation, when it comes to physical media and how much is actually on the game card itself. But I did at least want to go over what's happening here right now leading up to launch and kind of clarify the situation around the game key card, because it looks like there's a whole new kind of cartridge we have to deal with. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. And it is just, there's a lot of stuff happening right now, so if you're trying to keep up with the Switch 2 stuff, definitely want to subscribe. But we still have, like, Game & Talk is later on tonight. Chaos, I'm sure, on there, and Mayhem. We got Click R3 coming up. It's just constant stuff. Newswave tomorrow. Went over every game that was in that Direct and then more. So a lot of stuff hitting right now. That's tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Newswave's back, so that should be fun. But let's take a look here. This is over on Nintendo's website, the Switch 2 Game Key Card Overview. So they say the game key cards are different from regular game cards because they don't contain the full game data. Instead, the game key card is your key, quote unquote, to downloading the full game to your system via the internet. After it's downloaded, you can play the game by inserting the game key card into your system and starting it up like a standard physical game card. They also have the packaging here where at the bottom it says that it's a game key card, just to be as upfront as possible, I guess, with it. Now, here's the thing, okay? This technically isn't that new. I mean, the idea of game key card being more of a universal thing from the beginning is. We've actually already had game key cards before, but the problem we run into is it was such a case-by-case basis. You didn't necessarily know what you were going to get when, for example, you saw this banner at the top. Come to know this pretty well, Switch owners. Going through the generation, you would occasionally have this banner. It might be like all white with a little blue internet symbol there. It might be just blue outright on the bottom of it. Eventually, they tried to put it on the back. Basically, it would say, in this case, internet download and micro SD card required. Why is that? Well, what would happen is, of course, the cartridges themselves would vary in cost for the manufacturer, the publisher. They would then decide how much of the game they wanted to put on the cartridge and how much they would have the end user, the consumer, download. NBA 2K was infamous for shipping with like a 4 GB card and then making you download like 26 gigabytes or something because they didn't want to ship on a 32 GB card. So this, technically, with this game key thing, is not new in the idea. It's new in what they're trying to do of make this more of a universal thing to where a game key card wouldn't be a one-time download code that's just shoved in the box. So the Banner Saga Trilogy, as an example, from what I remember, is they had like one game on the cartridge, they had to download the other parts, and in some cases, even with like trilogies or collections, you might have one thing on the cartridge, and then you have a game code inside that then gives you the other games, all right? And that was fairly common for many different titles. And I think it was pretty frustrating because what they would take away from you is any kind of resale value afterwards. Because one of the reasons, of course, people buy physically is not only to have it ready and available there on your shelf and not have to, say, access the internet to then get to the game you've already purchased, but also the idea of, hey, maybe I want to sell or trade this thing in later. If it's on a piece of paper and you punch the code in, you can't do it then. Even though you bought it physically with the case. It just felt like a waste for I'm sure for not only just myself, but many people out there. So the idea of this game key is to make it so, yes, you do have resale value because it is tied to this cartridge. Also, after the one-time download, all you have to do is then put the cartridge in and you won't have to access the internet because it's authenticating through the game card slot. It's important to note, this is not the only method of game distribution, okay? This is one of the options, right? They even say here it's a different from regular game cards. So yes, there are just regular game cards where the game itself is on there, all right? And in fact, I prefer this as opposed to what was a grab bag of things when we would see this banner, this thing at the top, right? Who knows what you were going to get? But we do have some games right now that are leveraging large game cards. So we had the press release that was pushed for Cyberpunk, and they updated it on their website. Check this out. They're going to use a 64 gigabyte cartridge for this thing. They say the owners can purchase the game on launch day in a physical 64 gigabyte game card. Or, of course, you can just download the game if you want to go digital with it. But we are now seeing the 64 gigabyte game card be used, as well as, yes, they're still leaning into game cartridges in general with everything there on the cart. Now, you still have probably a day one patch that's become pretty much universal, it feels like, across the board with gaming in general right now. But no, the game key does not mean that every Switch 2 game is going to be this way. I think this is mostly an option that Nintendo is presenting for some of these publishers, because with the current Switch, there were games that didn't come to it, not because it couldn't run on the system, but because it didn't make sense to put it on the cartridge or do the trick of, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll have it just be download only. And there were some issues when it came to file size, is what I'll say, and it's just being too large for the system. And I feel like Nintendo is taking that feedback from manufacturers and publishers and be like, you know what? We'll go ahead and make it so that you can create what I have to assume is an incredibly cheap cartridge. I mean, think about it. If it's just authenticating and identifying the game that you've then purchased, and it's just like a little plastic cartridge, of course, they get the red cartridge. You probably have to store megabytes of data on that thing. So it's probably extremely cheap. And you know what? I am going to buy one of these, specifically because I think it'd be interesting to take it apart and see what's going on in there with the cartridge. I do want to get the 64 gigabyte cartridge for Cyberpunk as well, just to see that, because they did use a 32 gigabyte cartridge for The Witcher 3, and now here they are using a 64 gigabyte cartridge for Cyberpunk on the Switch 2. I don't know, it'd be kind of interesting to see the differences here. I have to assume this Switch 2 game key is almost hollow inside, minus probably a chip or two, just to hold like a string of text and stuff to set up for authentication. So here's one of the games that will be using the game key card, and that's Street Fighter 6. To my understanding, Bravely Default is also using it, and that's a little bit of a head scratcher because apparently it's 11 gigabytes and they're still using the game key. But in this case, Street Fighter 6 is 50 gigabytes. Capcom probably doesn't want to pay for that 64 gigabyte cartridge, although, hey, it seems like CD Projekt is all for it, unless they do have some kind of deal with Nintendo, which, I don't know, I'm kind of curious because Witcher 3 was on a 32. We'll see with that one. But these are the kinds of games, unfortunately, that I think will tap the game key card. Things that are probably above 32 gigabytes, maybe even, again, Bravely Default, 11 gigabytes. My issue here is I think this is kind of the easy way out, for publishers. It's there for them to fall back on, which is unfortunate because I think this will become very, very commonplace going forward because it's the most money, it's more profitable. And that's what this is. It's a business, so these companies want to make the most money possible. And when you're offered up something like this that probably costs, let's face it, 5 or 10% of what a 64 gigabyte cartridge is going to cost them, they're going to lean towards something like this, especially for a release like Street Fighter 6 that's like, okay, how well is this really going to sell when it's coming to the platform quite a bit later than it was on other platforms. It's kind of hard to say there. And then obviously the big drawback is will these servers be available 20 years from now, we'll say, to where this game keycard will even work at all. But just wanted to clear up some of the confusion, as some were thinking that Game key cards are the only cards on the Switch 2. Not the case, all right? So you will still have standard game cards as well as game key cards. It's just the thing is, it's going to be up in the air as to third parties, which way they'll go with it. I think Nintendo, first party wise, will mostly stick with just putting everything on the cartridge because they've shown in the past they have no problem charging consumers more for the larger game card. Look at something with Tears of the Kingdom, for example. Even Mario Kart World, there's a chance that could be on a larger cartridge, and guess what? It's $80. All right, so that's just kind of the way Nintendo seems to be moving, whereas third parties, they'd probably rather sell you a game key card that only has to house, a couple hundred megabytes maybe, and make you download 50 or 60 gigabytes. Final Fantasy VII Intergrade, I have to assume, will be a game key card, but who knows? We'll keep an eye out for that. Unfortunately, there's just going to be a lot of guessing, it feels like, when it comes to this stuff for this generation, and probably by the end of it, I have to assume we're going to see more game key cards than regular cards, at least from third party. And that would eventually push everything to digital anyway. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. Another step towards digital games across the board. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.